Here we go. Let's do it, man. We got it. We got a great market in front of us, John. I love it.
Yeah, well, if you love it, Pete, tell me you don't love this too. A little smooth criminal or whatever for Halloween.
Why not?
Let's hear it. That's right. Smooth criminal.
Is this whole thing AI or what the hell is it?
I mean, it's just one of those things you see on Instagram, Pete. You know, an Instagram reel or whatever.
It's stop motion animation, and it's DM Galloway at DGDX Animation. He does a lot of really funny, really great animations.
That's great.
Well, thank you, DG Galloway.
Yeah, way to go. Well done on Halloween, man. We got to love it, right?
A little Jason coming out with the knife. Well, welcome to the Rebel's Edge, folks. We appreciate you joining us. Jared is going to be handling all of the tough stuff today, which include that sound and that video that we just showed you. And Pete and I are going to break down Macro Minute at the top of the show right now. So, Pete, my Macro Minute is going to be General Motors because they're the last of the big three: Stellantis, which used to be Chrysler, Ford, General Motors. They finally end this 6-week strike. If you look at how much GM slid, you'll know why, because obviously they shuttered the factories, Pete. It was costing them $200 million a week. Ouch.
That's a real number. For my Macro Minute, I'm going to give you this, John. How about the light volume that we had yesterday? If you go back and you look, and we've been talking about this for a while now, but the month of October averaging about 45 million contracts a day. We had multiple days leading into yesterday, over 50 million contracts trading during those days. Well, yesterday we slowed back down again. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It shows me that people are kind of putting their hands a little bit in their pockets, John, to some degree, because they're just still going to be confused about the Fed. I'm going to tell you right now, they're going to pause. I have no question at all about that. They will pause.
Yep, I believe so too, Pete. And the stock volume was rather robust. But to Pete's point, folks, and I said that on Kudlow yesterday, Pete, but to your point, the option volume was way down. You and I would argue, I think, Pete, that a lot of the majority of option investors are the smarter investors because they know leverage, they define their risk on entry, and when the smarter people aren't putting money into the markets, that might tell you something too. All right, let's talk, Pete, about what's going on with Fantastic Futures because
Fantastic Futures.
That's almost a Halloween-y kind of sound. Pete said a Halloween-y. So Fantastic Futures are Nat Gas, 295 last week, Pete. Hits 356 just a little bit ago. That's per million British thermal unit. Now that's a 20% jump in Nat Gas in 4 days. So,
and this is where the rubber meets the road. And it shows me that you're a really smart guy. Because you know what my Fantastic Futures are? Nat Gas at 293 a week ago, and now 356. That's a 22% move. I'll tell you, John, I find it really, really interesting that we purposely don't do that. We don't release each other what exactly we're going to talk about, but that is exactly where I was going. That's a big move, despite the fact that we're watching crude just kind of ease back off of that 92 and now hanging around 82, 83, but Nat Gas is going up.
Yeah, it's something that we're going to keep our eye on because that's something that the Fed, which has a little date with all of us tomorrow, Pete, or very, very shortly, we're going to be talking about all these inputs and what they mean for inflation going forward. All right, let's talk about Wolfspeed because this one came out, Pete, with some earnings, and the earnings were pretty spectacular. They guided to a loss that was still a pretty significant loss, but much smaller than the loss that had been expected by Wall Street. So that's a good thing. Losses are never great, but losing less than they expected is a good thing. And the stock's up 23% so far today, Pete.
It's a big jump. And when you look across and you see revenue up about 4% and earnings, and they've done better. Now, this still is a company that's struggling to make money, which is something you and I talk about all the time. We're not necessarily all that big of fans of it, but over time, you've got to prove to us that you can make money. And maybe they're on their way, John, because they were talking big, and they definitely had a great quarter this past quarter. And whenever you get a great quarter and you get a little bit of guidance for a little bit of growth to continue, that's always something good. This is a company that's got a big move to the upside, but let's also remember where it's coming from. It was very much on 52-week lows before this result. So it's a long way from the 52-week highs, that's for sure.
Yes, sir. Well, let's dive in, Pete, to Pinterest, because this is one that, believe it or not, folks, it still is a social media play.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of memes and a lot of pictures and so forth, Pete. It's different, but nonetheless, it's up, and it's up big, nearly 19% right now. They reported top and bottom line quarterly earnings that were above expectations. That'll do it for you. But how about this one, Pete? 45 million shares traded by noon versus 10 million normal volume. So they've got some shorts, and they are squeezing those shorts tight.
They are. As a matter of fact, the stock is pushing right up against the 52-week highs, right about $30, John. So a really nice jump today. Their monthly active users definitely jumping as well. So when you look at what they were able to accomplish this past quarter, this company has done this time and time again of late, and I've been very impressed by it, John. The biggest frustration I had is you and I were really busy yesterday. We were jumping around, doing all these things. We love the people at the Money Show, but we missed some unusual options that were bought yesterday in there that went from $1.50 to, just something north of $5. That's not so bad in a day. That's why we trade options, folks. That's why we trade options.
That's 100% correct, Pete. Well, let's take a look at one now that had been down as much as 50%. Losing half your market value in one day is a lot. Well, it's recovered, Pete, to a loss of 40%, and that's Sarepta. They had a phase 3 trial, and you and I know that means volatility because it's uncertain. How is that trial going? Well, the beginning of that trial did not go well at all, and this is for muscular dystrophy. And oh my gosh, the stock, the turnover in shares, Pete, it's 16 million shares versus 900,000 normal. So call it like 17 times normal volume. There's a lot of people just getting out of this one.
They are, and it's at 52-week lows, or at least it hit 52-week lows today, John. So this is a stock that's really been under some massive pressure when you look at it. Here's the problem. This drug already exists, and the CEO was trying to get out in front of this whole thing saying, hey, look, we think that this can be something that's going to be in another category. The problem I would say back would be, well, that's fine, but it's not much better than the placebo right now for what you're trying to do with it. And if that's the case, that's a major problem. And that is the case. And it is a major problem. So it's something they're going to have to deal with for sure. They are not profitable either, John. That's the other thing that bothers me. And you and I talk about this all the time in different companies. Biotech, it's not unusual that it's a company that's still working. But these guys have drugs already on the market, right? They've already been able to get there. Problem is, when you look at the balance sheet, doesn't look all that great. There are some shorts in there. I bet you this, some of that volume you're seeing today will be some of the shorts probably closing up some of their positions, because this is a heck of a move to the downside, and that would be the smart way to actually try to maybe catch yourself on the upside if this thing gets an upside. But the move to the downside, it certainly was accelerated, and now I think you're going to maybe see a stop where we see some of those buyers maybe step back in to close positions, not to open big long positions, but maybe to close some of those shorts.
Yeah, I would bet that's correct, Pete. And it's just a sad story all the way around, from people afflicted with things to the shareholders in the company that have bet on this. Let's talk about Lattice Semiconductor, Pete, because these were some of the worst earnings in years for these guys. The stock isn't down that much year to date. I think it opened at about 66 in January, Pete. It's 56 today, but it's down 16% today. They basically edged just slightly above Wall Street's targets for the quarter, but they missed massively on the guidance. And at this time, with people nervous about the Fed, nervous about the market, which had an 8% sell-off into yesterday's 1% rally. That's something I was telling Larry yesterday, Larry Kudlow. I said, let's not put out the bunting just yet. All we did was see a 1.25% rally after a 9% sell-off. That's not exactly like, woohoo, we're out of the, everything's hunky-dory. No, it's not.
Right. No, you're right, John. I'll tell you, the guidance, and you mentioned this already, they missed on that. But how about the fact that they're decelerating? And that's, I think, even a bigger problem. It's one thing to, okay, the guidance for next quarter, it's a little bit weak. That's obviously terrible. But when you're starting to see a deceleration in your earnings and your sales, that's something that I think is more alarming, and it's making me be a little bit more itchy. I am not interested in trying to buy the bottom on this one. Like you said, stock is all the way down. It's trading around $56, something like that. Not that far off of the lows, but it's still got a way to go, I think, to the downside, because in this market, in this environment, I think people get a little bit more nervous about stocks like this, and they don't want to have a rabbit's foot in their pocket, which is what they'd have to catch this thing at the right time.
Well, this is a difficult time for many semiconductor companies, Pete, whether they help put them together or whether they're like Lattice. This is not exactly the salad days, as they say, for those guys. All right, let's talk a little Rebels Red Zone, Pete, for some sports, shall we?
Yeah, I like being in the red zone. I think that's pretty cool. What we wanted to cover today, John, first was this is the NFL deadline, and it's today, and it's Halloween. I mean, it all comes together just perfectly. But you just wonder which teams are going to make some of the biggest moves, and there have already been many moves, John, coming into this. And about a week or two ago, it started to accelerate a little bit. And today we're seeing a little bit more. And I think by the end of the day, we'll see even more. I think the biggest one so far is Leonard Williams leaving the Giants. He loved it there. But now he's going to Seattle with Pete Carroll. And I think that's going to be a really good marriage, because Pete Carroll being a defensive guy, Seattle being the kind of a team that they are and very competitive, I think that Leonard would be very happy to leave New York, even though he was gracious about leaving. I mean, he talked about what a great organization they are and everything, but he's going out now all the way to the West Coast. He'll be in Seattle, and he'll be on a team that's got a shot this year. And Pete Carroll's done an amazing job. And thanks a lot to the Denver Broncos for giving them the opportunity to do an amazing job with all those draft picks that they gave, going back to Russell Wilson again. But anyway, John, I think that we're going to have to figure out what the Vikings are going to do, because I know that you and I watched a little bit of football, but we didn't have much time. And Kirk Cousins, with that torn Achilles, that's a major issue. And this is a guy, whether you like him or don't like him, has had a great year up to this point. So what will the Vikings do? Is there a way that they can maybe dig themselves out of this thing and have a quarterback? Because right now on their roster, I don't believe that any of those quarterbacks can actually carry this team the way that anything close to the way that Kirk Cousins was carrying the team. Kirk was literally leading in most categories for quarterbacks, Johnny. He had a great year starting up, but now obviously he'll be out for the rest of the year. He is not coming back, and I don't think he's Aaron Rodgers. I don't think he might go to the same doctor, but he might not be using the same kind of recovery method. But they also have Danielle Hunter. And what do you do with Danielle Hunter, right? Because if your team's not going to be competitive because you don't have a quarterback, then they're going to have to make a decision. Now, on the other hand, maybe you trade Danielle Hunter to get some picks and maybe a quarterback of some sort. But This is a guy who wants $30 million a year, so he's going to have to go to the right team. He's playing for a one-year contract right now with the Vikings that's substantially different than that number. But you look around the league, John, guys like Danielle Hunter are getting $30 million a year. So who can afford them? It would be the question I have.
Yeah, well, you're right, Pete. And Jeremy Fowler over at ESPN, I saw that he tweeted out today that according to his sources, in quotes, there is no chance that they're going to move Danielle Hunter. No chance. We'll see. But I tend to agree that there's not enough time to get a deal done for that kind of, for a guy that's going to be asking for that kind of money, Pete. Likewise in Chicago, Jaylen Johnson. This guy is one of the best defensive backs in football. If you haven't seen him, it's because Chicago sucks so bad that nobody wants to watch. But he is one of the best, and he asked for a contract negotiation. They tried to get something done. They couldn't. So now he said, "Okay, I want permission to be traded." Now, I guess that, comes across some guys' desks, and maybe if they've got a banged up D-back and they're, in the playoff hunt, Pete, maybe they do go for this guy because he is that good. But that, I think, is a possibility. But here's what has happened according to Ian Rappaport, Pete, again, over at the Rap Sheet. He calls his Twitter account @RapSheet. The Bears and the Commanders are supposedly the Bears are going to be getting Montez Sweat in exchange for a second-round draft pick. I think that's probably correct. I love that they're going after a guy of this caliber, but it ain't going to make a difference with the team the Bears are putting on the field this year. So this is building for the future, even though it's occurring by the trade deadline.
Yep. They've done a lot on the defensive side, John. We talked about it in free agency, and they've done better, but it's the problem probably has been more on the offensive side and what they need to do maybe with the offensive line and some of the other positions. But it'll be interesting and nonetheless. And I think it will get a little bit busier as we get towards the end of today. I think that there's a lot of teams that are kind of shuffling things around a little bit. All right, John, 8 weeks into the college football season, who should be the Heisman Trophy winner in the first 8 weeks? Because obviously you got to play the whole season. But I've got my own set of names that I think are out there, but there's really one, maybe two out there, John. 6 of the last 7 Heisman Trophy winners, quarterbacks. So we can almost just say, all right, let's line up the quarterbacks and just go through them and say, who is it? Well, Caleb Williams last year won the Heisman Trophy, right? He's back. He's at USC, having an unbelievable year. My pushback on him, quite frankly, would be this. This is a team that's got 2 losses. And why do they have the 2 losses? Well, they have a terrible defense, but he's also had a game or two, John, where he has not looked like a Heisman Trophy quarterback. Now, generally, when you look at his stats, you'd say, well, what are you talking about? This guy looks fantastic. He does. But you've got to win. I mean, it really does come down to your team has to win. And you have to be the guy who's the leader of your team, who is the guy who's literally the catalyst to get to that point. That's why, in my opinion, it's Bo Nix. When you look at Oregon and you take a look at him as their quarterback, John, the guy's 78% on completion percentage. It's just amazing to me. He's also got, 21 touchdowns and 1 interception. So when I look at what he's been able to do and how they've been able to do it, they got 1 loss. It was a great game against Washington. Could have gone either way. They went for it on a couple of different 4th down situations. Didn't get it. But I'll tell you, I think right now he lines up as the guy who would be my front runner for the Heisman Trophy.
Well, you're right, and he should be the guy, Pete. But I'll tell you who's going to win it. Because if Michigan wins out, J.J. McCarthy is going to walk away with this thing, in my opinion. And that is because, just as another Michigan quarterback, when they went to the national title and won the national title, God, Pete, what was that, 25 years ago or something like that? But they did. And Greasy's son won it. Was he the best? No. No. But if you win out, you're going to win the Heisman. That's the way this thing goes. The voters, the lazy sports writers that don't bother to see every game, even though they think they're, rah, rah, I'm a big sports writer, and they only watch Ohio State, Washington, Alabama, Georgia, and things like that. This guy, McCarthy, I think, is a shoo-in, Pete. If Michigan wins out, and the Heisman, of course, is before he can win out.
Yeah.
Because the Heisman's in December, folks, and the playoffs and the final are in January. But I think he'd be in a position to win out, Pete, and a strong performance against whoever he plays for the Big Ten championship. If they win that, which will be before the Heisman, I think then he walks out with the award. And maybe, some would say he should, but I still think you're right. Bo Nix is the best. Penix is probably number 2, and this guy'd be number 3. But again, if you lead him to that championship and it looks like he's on the way to do that, he is your man.
Yeah, I think you're right. The only thing that would bother me if that was the case, John, is when you look at Michigan, the team, they are so loaded everywhere that you start wondering, okay, is this guy good because of this, his offensive line, or his wide receivers, or the running backs? Well, in Michigan's case, it's all of the above. They are literally loaded everywhere. And you also kind of got to wonder about Michigan right now. Harbaugh's found himself into a pretty interesting spot with the filming, and obviously he already came off of the suspension that he already had. So there's a lot of things going on at Michigan right now that might maybe spoil that just a little bit. And maybe those writers won't be as lazy and they'll actually look around and say, Bo Nix has thrown 1 interception so far. 1. Now, clearly he'll throw more, I'm sure, before the end of the year, but that's pretty impressive. We talk about accuracy all the time. We talk about all these different things when we talk about sports. This kid right now is lighting it up, and he's doing it in a big way, and he's throwing the ball more than most of the other guys, which means that ball's in the air. It can always land somewhere. So, he's taking the chances that other quarterbacks probably aren't. I'm really impressed with that kid.
So I'm surprised you didn't have Shakur Sanders on your list, Pete.
He's very good. He is very good, John. But and here's the problem for him. He doesn't have an offensive line. So in fairness to him, given the fact that he doesn't have an offensive line and he has been able to perform to the level he has, that really it doesn't give him the opportunity to stand out as much. And I think that's the one knock on him would probably be they just can't tell. Is he really good? Is he extremely good? Or what? Because the offensive line is just not there. But he's got great numbers so far. Their numbers are a little bit short. And when you look at the wins and losses, they certainly have more losses than Oregon and Michigan and some of the rest of those teams. So, those losses add up, and that's tough to win the Heisman.
You go from 3-0 to 4-4, Pete.
Yeah.
And you and I know you don't win the Heisman on a team that's 500.
Right.
He is a great player. He needs 20 pounds or more, in my opinion, to make it through an NFL kind of grind.
Right.
But nonetheless, he is an extremely talented athlete with a fabulous dad and mom that really put him in a great position. But unfortunately for him, and unfortunately for Caleb Williams, Pete, because if he hadn't had the Heisman last year, you'd look at his numbers and say, he's a top 2 or 3 pick for the Heisman. Right now, I think both of us would say, no, he's not. He's not top 6, top 7, because the numbers aren't as impressive as they were. And, they're loath to have a repeat Heisman winner, quite frankly, I think, Pete, because Archie Griffith, it's like, okay, Archie and nobody else.
Yeah, that's true. It's amazing, but there's a lot of different factors that go into it. And I'm going with the eyeball test right now. Bo Nix, to me, is the Heisman Trophy winner. But we'll see, because those guys have a different opinion, I'm sure.
Well, folks, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We had to do a special yesterday because we were at the Money Show and we had so many commercials and shoots with Charles Payne and all that kind of stuff. But we appreciate all of you tuning in. We will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a nice Halloween. Be safe.